Welcome to the third 50 Objects program. My name is Melissa Yumi Bailey. I am Program Development Associate at the National Japanese American Historical Society. In case some of you are joining us for the very first time, the National Japanese American Historical Society, also known as NINJAS, is dedicated to the collection, preservation, authentic interpretation, and sharing of historical information about the Japanese American experience. Today's program will feature Ibuki Hibi Lee, as well as her brother Satoshi Hibi, and their family's story of the incarceration. So now I would like to introduce Nancy Ukai, who's the project director of 50 Objects and Stories, who will tell you a little bit more about today's program, our panelists, and the project.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Nancy Ukai, and I'm project director of 50 Objects. I work along with David Izu, our art director, and today we'll be talking about object number 18, Ibuki's doll. And we're so pleased to have Ibuki Hibi Lee with us and Satoshi Hibi. Ibuki, would you like to say hello and wave?
Hi, everybody. Still around.
Ibuki's coming to us from the San Francisco Bay Area, and Satoshi was born in San Francisco. He's Ibuki's older brother. He was born in San Francisco, but after the war, he lived in Japan for 40 years, but he's now back in San Francisco. Satoshi, would you like to wave and say hi?
Hi.
Okay, so today what we will do is first look at a pre-recorded video interview that I did with Ibuki recently, and that will be followed by a live Q&A. So first, please enjoy this short video by David Izu, the art director of 50 Objects. Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Nancy Ukai, and I'm project director for the 50 Objects project. Today we'll be exploring a doll that was photographed in Hayward in 1942 when its 5-year-old owner, Ibuki Hibi, was waiting to be taken away to the Tanforan concentration camp in San Bruno, California. The doll survived for nearly 80 years after that, being carried from Tanforan to the Topaz, Utah camp, to New York after the war, and then back to California. Today we have with us the person who you see on the right-hand side, Ibuki Hibi, and you see in the middle a picture of her taken by Dorothea Lang holding the doll. Ibuki, would you just like to say hello?
Hi, everybody. I'm still around many years later. I'm trying to recall our memories.
So the doll has, in the intervening years, lost its hair. It's developed chips and cracks on its body, and it has 12 Band-Aids placed on all of its joints. So we're very happy to be able to talk about this doll today and also be chatting with Ibuki. So in 1942, as families were being removed from their homes, many girls could be seen carrying their dolls to camp. And, Ibuki was one of those girls. This is in small children being taken to Manzanar in 1942. Once the children arrived in camp, however, another type of doll appeared, and that was the handmade doll. So the left shows rag dolls made by the girls at Tule Lake, California, a doll being packed as the family is ready to being released. And the doll on the right was made from buttons and beads and a head formed from cloth with a hand-painted face. Bells were used for the hands to shake and get a smile from the baby, Teiko Saito, by her mother at Minidoka, Idaho. It shows how few materials there were, but also the love of the parent. And so today, because we have Ibuki with us, we thought we'd do a more in-depth exploration of some of the things that made up the environment in which the children lived at Topaz, Ibuki and her brother Satoshi, and the doll too. So please read our website article, object number 18. It's titled Ibuki's Doll, to learn more about the specifics of the dolls. So Hisako Shimizu and Matsusaburo Hibi were both born in Japan, and they were both artists. They married in 1930 in San Francisco. Ibuki, can you tell us a little bit about how they met?
Well, my father loved this country when he first came as a student in 1920, and he had the inclination to paint Western style, which he couldn't do in Japan. And he loved going to art school to learn, and he attended art school for about 11 years. My mother, who's more than 20 years younger than my father, also took an interest in art when she was in high school, because she wasn't able to write well, she said, but she was able to express herself through art. So she went to the same art school in San Francisco, the California School of Fine Arts, and met my father there, who was ready at the right age to, settle down finally and have a relationship and be married, because he was very busy in the community trying to help other Japanese families and other Japanese, who were coming to this country, and finally settled down after meeting my mother. In 1930, they were married.
Satoshi and Ibuki were you born in Hayward? Where were you born, Ibuki?
Well, there was no hospital in Hayward at the time. So I was born in Oakland Hospital, East Oakland Hospital.
And this looks to be you and your father and your brother. Is this the San Francisco Tea Garden? Where is this? This looks like San Francisco.
This is the World's Exposition, 1939 or 1940. I was just about 4 years old, and I was born in 1937. And this was the Japanese pavilion. Japan and the United States were in pretty good relationship at the time.
So the family lived in Hayward on Jackson Street, and after Executive Order 9066 was issued by President Franklin Roosevelt and the roundup of Japanese Americans began from the West Coast, the Hibi family was waiting on the sidewalk, and Dorothea Lange, a WRA photographer, came up and took this photograph. It was May 9th, 1942. And it's become an iconic image, and Ibuki is holding a doll. Ibuki, do you remember this period of packing and leaving?
Not really. I was just very clinging with my father and mother, and they made me feel secure. So, for a preschooler, that's all I wanted, to be near my own family, which was my father and mother and older brother.
The same day, this photograph that includes Satoshi was also taken by Dorothea Lange. And although your mother looks extremely dignified, really, and calm, just days before she wrote in her memoirs, April 30th, 1942 was a clear day. A peddler drove up and piled his old truck high with our tables, chairs, the record player, the standing radio, the upright piano, rugs, and many other household goods. He hurled Ibuki's tricycle and Tommy's red wagon into the heap. The man, a stranger, priced the items of furniture himself. He gave me $25 for the piano, $5 for living room rug, and so on. Helplessly, the family watched the truck speed away. And so you can imagine the upheaval. And actually, before that, your father offered to give paintings away. And this is an Oakland Tribune article which you shared. And it said that in appreciation of many friendships among Americans, Matsusaburo Hibi, Bay Area Japanese artist who faces evacuation, today offered 50 oil paintings and monotype prints to local public and civic institutions, such as hospitals, clinics, schools, clubs, or libraries. Do you know, have any of the paintings been recovered?
I don't believe so. I guess I did go to the Hayward Historical Society sometime in the early century, and there were two paintings there by my mother and father, pre-war time, and I saw them, but they were just two paintings.
So then the family, after several months at Tanforan, was moved in a train to Topaz, Utah, 800 miles away, in the fall of 1942. And they were assigned to Block 16, Barrack 7, Unit B. So here in the front row, there's you, Ibuki, and your mother, and Satoshi. Who is that, your father? And
My one uncle, who was my mother's younger brother, who was about 9 years younger than my mother. And he had the apartment right next to ours, a little corner area. The corner room was for some bachelor or single person, and the other room was for our family of four.
you look so sweet with a little flower in your hair.
I wasn't I was not very happy, in this strange surroundings. I hardly ever smiled. My mother too.
So let's look a little bit at some of your father's work. He co-founded the Topaz Art School with Chiura Obata, who then left earlier, and your father became the director of it. And I think this diploma that your father designed for graduates of the art school is so amazing. It has the barrack roofs at the bottom and the mountains of topaz in the background.
I was my father's sidekick. I walked across the desert sands, almost every day with my father to the art school and coming back. And I just remember him always instructing others in painting and drawing and sketching and figurative art, and also carving from linoleum blocks and wooden blocks to create these kind of printouts. And he loved doing art, so this was a period in his life when he was able to do all kinds of different art.
This oil painting he did was in the 1992 exhibition, The View from Within.
Well, my father would hear the coyotes howling at night, and he imagined them, around the mountains of Topaz. So he did many paintings and woodblock prints with wild animals, especially coyotes.
It was actually that exhibition was reviewed in the New York Times, and the reviewer said, Hebe used the image of coyotes in the camps to evoke a sense of danger, but who is threatening whom? Do the coyotes represent the internees, their jailers, or simply themselves? Hebe's paintings, luminous and eerie, leave the question open. This homage to Mary Cassatt shows Hisako with Ibuki in the barrack and the coal stove behind them. And Ibuki actually edited this book. Well, I switched to this image of your school book, which you drew. I think the colors are amazing.
We had to make our own notebooks in class, and I was in the first grade, then the second grade, and I think it's the elementary school teacher who helped us, design some cover unique to ourselves. So that was one of my notebooks covers.
Ibuki, do you remember painting these? These are watercolors of obviously guard towers at Topaz, and they're in the collection of the Smithsonian.
I seem to have done a few watercolor towers of Topaz.
In 1945, the family was released from Topaz and they went to New York City. And Ibuki, do you know why your parents went to New York, and can you talk about these two photographs?
Of course, and my parents always had a dream of, visiting New York, the center of art in the United States, and then going to Paris too, where all the great artists, Western artists, were, doing very innovative work in modern art. And so when they had this opportunity to go wherever they wanted in the States, they chose to go to New York. My parents owned no property in California or Western states.
And what kind of work were they able to get?
Well, it was very difficult for all the internees who had to look for employment after the war. So my mother and father just did piecework, just doing some kind of art, painting objects and piecemeal work. And they had their hardships, in making a living.
I think the photo on the left shows Mr. Mariano, your father's last employer.
Mm-hmm. I think he had a shop on Madison Avenue, and he saw my father as a really good artist, and so he employed him, and my father had some freedom of how to paint the lampshades that he sold. So my father appreciated the fact that he could work, but until he became too ill to go to work.
What borough did you live in New York?
We lived on the West Side Story area, Hell's Kitchen. That's a lower West Side, 37th Street. In fact, I remember the address. 458 West, 37th Street.
And I believe the photograph on the right is at the George Washington Bridge.
Well, that's the memory I have. And it's written someplace maybe on the photograph, under the Washington Bridge.
He died of cancer on June 30th, 1947, so only 2 years after you left Topaz, and he was just a few days short of turning 61.
Well, they were very hard times that my mother couldn't talk about them, the years, and I still remember what happened. But well, my father sort of died of a broken heart, I think, because he had come to this country with such high hopes of being able to live here and to be an artist and maybe even get some acclaim as an artist. But he wasn't able to. So it was very depressing adolescence I had afterward. My mother, who was very depressed for at least 5 years.
How did your mother support herself after your father, I believe he had cancer?
She became a dressmaker, just like many other East Bay women in New York. She worked for Madison Avenue, couturier Charles James. He became very well known because he would create these fabulous silk gowns for society women and politicians' wives who lived in New York or D.C.
So I'm going to go to our last few slides and just return to the topic of dolls. This shows a family packing 2 dolls in the Seattle area, and they're, obviously in a glass case, and there's a European style doll with a pretty dress and a Japanese doll with a kimono garment on. And many Japanese American families actually burned or destroyed their Japanese dolls because they were considered to be evidence that the family was like the enemy. And so I thought what was interesting in the case of your doll was that, you said you didn't have Japanese dolls. You had 3 dolls. Is that right? And this was one of them.
Well, I mentioned that, I couldn't carry all my belongings around whenever I moved, and my mother handled the doll, so she had been the owner of the doll all these years until she passed away, 1991. And then I acquired the doll with her possessions when she passed away, and including the doll.
And so it's interesting because you said that this dress is the original dress, but then your mother was a seamstress working on this high couture and fancy dresses with many people to do tiny stitches for the hems. But I noticed there's a Japanese vest and also some little shorts that the doll came with. And I thought, oh, this doll has a Japanese vest.
So my mother, would often make dresses for my stuffed animals. And, she made the little stuffed animals herself for my children. And so it's natural for her to try to dress up this doll too and make some clothes for the doll.
And we should mention that it actually once had hair, but the hair fell off, and then it took the head plate with it. But you said your mother made a yarn wig for it.
But I didn't like that purple wig, so I took it off. I never was that much into dolls as a girl.
And what, Ibuki, was your favorite toy? Or did you like art materials? It doesn't have to be a toy per se.
I was going to tell you the story about my father in Topaz. And, you know, he built a little swing for me, a swing to sit on and to rock back and forth outside out of our barrack apartment. And then there was a little boy who came by who wanted to use the swing, and he got on the swing and he liked it so much he wouldn't let me use it. So I complained to my father that that's my swing, and he had made it for me, and I want to use the swing. Well, my father just told me that in this kind of environment that we're living in right now, you can't say that the swing is just for you. You have to share it with other children too who don't have a swing to ride on. So I still remember him saying that I have to share what I have with others. So I remember the swing that I liked outside our room in Topaz.
So we're going to move now into the question and answer portion of the program. So is it okay, Satoshi, if we go with you first, since we already heard a bit from Ibuki? Does that work?
I'm supposed to press the chat. I don't see it.
Oh, Ibuki, that's just for the people asking you questions, so you don't have to worry about it.
Okay.
Yeah, don't worry.
I don't have the chat.
That's okay, yeah. So if it's okay, we're going to start with a few questions for Satoshi, and then we'll move to you, Ibuki, okay? Okay. So Satoshi, as we know, the anniversary of Pearl Harbor is on Monday, December 7th, and it's going to be the 79th anniversary. You were 10 years old in 1941, correct?
It's 10 years old, yes.
Do you have any memories of Pearl Harbor happening?
Well, I remember after it had happened, I just heard it on the radio, and my parents were very disturbed, but I really didn't understand what was going on. But I found out the next day when I went to school, I was very unpopular, and I didn't really understand what was going on. But later it came to me.
So you are 5 years older than Ibuki. So when you were also 10, I guess, were you 10 or 11 to when you entered Tamfran and Topaz? Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have any memories of Tamfran or Topaz?
But do I have any memories? I have many memories. I don't know. They're just random memories. But it was a difficult period, I think, for everyone, including children. It was a rapid, sudden change, and I'm not used to being around only Japanese all the time. So it took some adjustments, I think, for everyone, but it was probably easier on the children than on the adults.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember taking anything special with you?
No, I don't remember taking anything special. I didn't have any toys.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Just we were instructed on how much we could carry.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't carry much. So just basically clothing. We didn't have to carry any kitchenware or anything else. We were told that everything would be available for us.
What was school like in camp compared to before camp?
Oh, if I could just mention, Satoshi, you had said too that in Hayward you were the only Japanese American, and I think you had said something about not getting chosen for teams and feeling self-conscious about that.
Well, that was the day after. the Pearl Harbor was on Sunday and Monday. Went to school, and during the playground period, I remember that we chose sides for sports, and I was not chosen, and which was unusual because I was chosen before Pearl Harbor. But that's my most vivid memory of sudden change, which I didn't fully understand.
We actually now have a question about your time in Japan after the war. What was it like moving to Japan from the US? And what did you do in your 40 years in Japan?
Well, I first of all, I went to Japan as a tourist about 3 or 4 times, mostly in the summertime. But later, after my wife was Japanese, and she was at the University of Pennsylvania, but she had to return for family reasons. And so I was separated from her for 2 years, and I was visiting each summer, but things were not looking too good in this country because I had walked off grants from the federal government, and grants were getting scarce, and I was, in my previous visits to Japan, I had a very positive experience. And so I took this opportunity to, after visiting 2 summers, I thought I should move over there and experience that. So I have moved to Japan intending to stay 2 or 3 years, but it ended up staying 40 years.
Yeah, Nancy let me know you have a house in Okayama?
Yes, I still have a house. It's in perfect condition.
Oh, wow.
And it's on an island, inland island with a very nice view. Mm-hmm. So I miss it.
And you also visited your family's villages on both sides of the family. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, my father's side was in Shigaken, which is the prefecture right above Tokyo. And the house is their house is about 40 miles from Kyoto. So when my first visit to Japan, I visited Kyoto very often because I could leave in the morning and come back in the evening. And my mother's house is in Fukui Prefecture. It's a bit more rural area. But my aunt had an empty house, empty small house by American standards. And so I stayed there a fairly long time, thought about different things.
So this is, I guess, our last question right now for Satoshi. So one person in our audience was curious, what Hayward School did you attend?
John Muir Elementary School.
And then, this is a question for both Ibuki and Satoshi. So I'll ask Satoshi first, and then we'll move to Ibuki, if that works. So did you pursue art after leaving camp?
Well, I'd always painted because of my mother's influence. But in college, I was a psychology major. I got my master's degree in psychology. And I began my doctoral program, but somehow I couldn't get too enthusiastic about it. So I took some optional art classes, and I said, well, I think this suits me better. And so I spent a lot of time in art.
So I guess now we'll move to Ibuki. So first question, did you pursue art after leaving camp?
Well, I think I noticed that my parents were always alone when they painted, and I used to be next to my mother or father as they painted, and it was sort of a lonely time for me as a child to be with parents who like to be alone and paint. And I mixed more, so I got into the medical field where I interacted with lots more people. But I always appreciated art, and I used some of my interest in creativity in other ways with my family. my grandchildren seem to be good artists, I see.
So we had one question from the audience about the doll. So the question is, how much did you use the doll to comfort you during camp? And actually, I was going to maybe bouncing off what you had said about going into the medical field. I was wondering if you could tell the story about how you used to play with your doll.
Well, I had very few toys as it was, and girls do use their dolls and animals for comfort, and I guess my dolls were close to me at one time, and I didn't take very good care of them, so they never survived, except for the little one
Yeah.
depicted in your show.
So another question, do either or both of you have much of the art your parents created?
Well,
I do.
my parents had so many paintings that my father's were donated to UCLA. Mother's paintings of camp were donated to JAM, Japanese American Historical, Japanese American National Museum.
One more question actually about the doll. Did your doll have a name?
I can't really recall.
So you mentioned your grandchildren and your children. Have you talked to your children and grandchildren about your experiences in camp?
Not really. Right now, the school curriculum does add the Japanese American experience to their history programs, and so my children learn about the Japanese internment at school when they get into at least high school. But when they were in elementary school, they often wrote stories about what they heard about the camps and poems too.
And your daughter Amy wrote a children's book about Topaz called "A Place Where Sunflowers Grow." Do you know what made her decide to write that book? And what inspired her?
Well, it was a take on my father. My father was the art director over at Topaz, and I did attend the art school, and it was a short story about the sunflowers and the art school where my father was a teacher. And art was also practiced in the elementary schools too, which I attended.
So another question from the audience for both of you. After camp was over, and you moved back during resettlement, did your family have to deal with any property or business loss?
Well, my parents did not own property in California when they went to camp. They had just rented property in wherever they lived in Hayward and Oakland. So they didn't lose, but they did lose whatever possessions that were in the rented house. There were some objects that were kept by a very close neighbor, and that was sent to New York. After we sent to New York, but not much.
So this is actually a cute question for Ibuki. Did your doll have any other doll friends in camp with other that belong to other playmates of yours? And Do you remember having your dolls talk to each other, or did you talk to your doll?
I can't really remember so long ago. There were two other girls in the same block that we lived at that went to the same elementary school I did. I think it was called Desert View Elementary, or it could have been Mountain View. I'm confused sometimes. But I can't remember dolls playing with them, together.
And then,
Those girls.
yeah. And Satoshi, do you have any memories of playing in camp? What were you up to while Ibuki was playing with her doll and the swing as well?
Yes, I was a brat like most children, and I don't remember doing anything special. Just walking around and playing softball. I remember playing softball, but I don't have a clear memory of that period.
And one more question from the audience. Where did you live immediately after being released from camp?
Well, we moved to New York City, and I went to high school. I graduated from high school in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
That was a move from the deserts of Utah to the heights of Manhattan.
Yeah.
There was a bachelor. There was a bachelor friend we had at Topaz, Mr. Tashima, and he went to New York first. And my father asked him to find us a place to live. And Mr. Tashima found this place on West 37th Street. It cost $20 a month. And that's where, at least I stayed 9 years. My brother stayed 4 years. He left New York after 4 years. I stayed 9 years.
Mm-hmm. And then so now there's a next question from the audience. Did you know that you were photographed by Dorothea Lange, or when did you find out that that photograph existed?
Well, the historical society you work for, they contacted and told me that they had a picture of myself with my mother taken by Dorothea Lange.
Oh,
I had
wow.
heard who she was, but this picture they gave me was superimposed, so it was on, I was on the one side of the picture, and the picture showed me on the other side. But it was good enough for me.
Was it really exciting then to receive it?
Very much so. It was after my mother passed away, though, because she really enjoyed that painting.
Mm-hmm.
I have been told that my Dorothea Lange may have known of my mother as an artist because she went to the galleries, in the Bay Area, and my mother often showed her paintings, artworks there. And I read one caption that said that this is the artist Hisako Hibi with Ibuki. So it's as if someone knew that that picture was of an artist. And it was written that way, artist Hisako Hibi in the picture. So as if Dorothea Lange may have known of my mother and took that picture.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I hadn't heard that one before, so.
It wasn't someplace I read that said her friend, artist Hisakuhibi. So
Oh, wow.
be nice if that's researched.
That's true. So we have, I guess, if any of the audience, okay, good. Yeah, we're getting a couple more questions. So this is the next questions are going to be for both Ibuki and Satoshi, and it's actually asking about food in camp. Do you remember having a hard time with the food? Or do you remember any sort of traditional Japanese food ever being served?
Satoshi?
Well, I remember that it was Irish style food, and but being a young man, I appreciated it. So a lot of people didn't like it because there were lots of beans and potatoes, but I didn't have any complaints about the food. I think if you were gourmet, you would have complaints every day. I was just a hungry young preteen.
My mother taught me to eat everything on my plate and learn to eat the things I don't like first. So I had the good things for the later. And later on in New York, when things were sort of difficult economically for our family, I was still in the habit of eating whatever is on my plate and finishing up everything and not be wasteful. The Japanese term.
Ibuki, there's a famous painting your mother made of New Year's, and there's mochi and a tangerine on it, and it's a painting. So I wondered if you remember eating mochi at New Year's. We're coming up to New Year's pretty soon.
I don't remember, but I know my mother did that painting because there was no mochi at Topaz. But later on, I heard that they did bring in mochi from Salt Lake City. Maybe that was in the last year. And that was a treat for the evacuees.
And do you remember, well, I know Satoshi talked about this a little earlier. So the question was, did you bring your cup and plate to meals in Topaz, or was that provided for you in the mess hall?
We brought it. We brought our own
Got it.
dishing utensils.
And then one last question, actually. And this is actually one I've never had anybody ask. How did you do your laundry? If you remember.
It was done by hand.
I've heard from somebody who was in Topaz too, and they said they remember my father going off to art school with his paint box, but my mother would be carrying a bucket of laundry to the laundromat. I mean, to the laundry room where they used the laundry board to scrub the clothes. So there was a laundry room.
Okay, so there was a laundry room.
Melissa, can I ask a question about
Of course.
the inside of the barrack? Ibuki, in our interview, you talked about the fact that your parents, being artists, like to paint on everything. You said they painted on the walls or the cupboards. And I wondered if that meant inside your barrack. I'm trying to picture the interior of your barrack with your parents applying their artistic vision to tablecloths and handkerchiefs. But did they also paint the interior of the barrack?
I really can't say, Nancy, but my father, whenever he saw something white, he would paint on it. And that was so in New York City. You know, my desk, my drawer, he'd paint flowers or animals on them.
So we had a question. How did you get art supplies in camp?
Well, my father, as a director in art, would order all he wanted from this Arthur Brown company in San Francisco, and they and the WRA War Authority would buy it because they wanted to keep the evacuees occupied and happy. And so whatever my father seemed to want to order was done. So
Wow.
because when there were leftover supplies, I remember being able to use them in New York City too.
Do you, and one other question about art, do you have any memories of your dad and his relationship with Chihiro Obata?
Well, my father and Chihiro Obata go back as friends way back to the 1920s when they formed the East-West Society in San Francisco for all kinds of different creative artists. And they even put on a program for San Franciscans over at the Legion of Honor in the 1920s. And my father and Chihiro Obata were best men at their weddings. Like Chihiro Obata was a best man at his wedding as my father was at Chihiro Obata's. And after my father died, I remember Chihiro Obata, he came once to New York City and had a little gathering. That was in 1949. They were good friends, and my mother was very good friends with Mrs. Obata, who's really a person in her own right. And I wish there's a book about her, Haruko Obata. She brought flower arrangement to the Bay Area, and especially East Bay. She held classes until she was in her 80s in her house on Oregon Street in Berkeley.
Oh, are you finished, Ibuki? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, she was one of the first flower arrangers, instructors, or maybe even the first
Oh, wow.
in the country.
So we have just two more questions from the audience because we're about to get to our end time. So one question, and this is really for both Satoshi and Ibuki, it's just asking about your memories. Do you remember any gardens or plots for growing food at Topaz?
You're older, Satoshi.
Oh, there were gardens, mini gardens, I would say. And there was an area outside camp where some vegetables were grown. I remember that because we had a large representation of farmers. And, they knew how, after experimenting on the soil, I remember they're complaining about the soil and the water, but they managed to get some vegetables.
And then one last question for both of you. What kind of comfort food do you like to eat now?
Well, I like manju.
Yeah.
Well, we're fortunate to be near Japanese groceries, so we eat at least one meal a week from the Nijiya. And then we eat at Japanese restaurant too. Favorite take Yoshitomi.
All right. Well, so we're going to go ahead and start wrapping up our program. So yeah, so thank you again to our funders. This is the third of 4 programs. So we want to give special thanks to the San Francisco Japantown Foundation, Grants for the Arts, National Park Service, the Henry and Tomoya Takahashi Foundation. Thank you so much for your support. And then just again, just one more closing of, so we can get Ibuki and Satoshi on the screen just for one final goodbye. So yes, thank you again, Ibuki and Satoshi. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed this today. So I'm just going to pass it again on to Nancy, who'll just give us a little bit of information about the remaining 50 Objects program.
Okay, so thank you everybody for sharing a part of your day with us today. We'll see you next month when we talk with Sam Mihara about his father and the very exquisite, really, braille board that he had made at the Hart Mountain, Wyoming camp after he lost his sight, and how he continued to publish and to educate. We'll have Sam Mihara joining us. So thank you to everyone here today, and please be well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody.